There's a big election coming. It's easy to forget that when we've had the pandemic, we've had the George Floyd murder and all the subsequent protests. America's been, really in a form of warfare for most of the year. And yet in 4 months or so, they will go to the polls, Americans. How are they going to vote?
Well, listen, it's 133 days that you guys have mentioned. So in Trump world, that's like 500 years. That's like taking things back to Christopher Columbus in North America. So it's going to be very, very hard to predict. If the election were held today, I think the president is behind, and I think it's a very difficult gap to close, Piers. But I was with him during the Access Hollywood fiasco, October 7th, 2016. We did the flash polling that weekend. He was down 13 going into that debate with Secretary Clinton, the second debate, and he won the election 30 days later. I do think this is different now because I think he's jumped the shark, which is an American expression, is that his rap, if you will, or his sales pitch is starting to fatigue the American people. The coronavirus is preventing people from really wanting to go to these rallies. And if you look at the poll numbers, very, very big gap for him to overcome with women over the age of 50. So we'll have to see what happens. Anything's possible in Trump world. But I think Vice President Biden has him right now. The only thing I would say to Vice President Biden, and frankly, I have said to Vice President Biden, is just don't take the bait. You had 19 politicians that were nicknamed and ridiculed and castigated on Twitter or at rallies. They all took the bait from President Trump. You know him, Piers. I know him. He is very effective in the nicknaming business. He's very effective in the mud, if you will. And I think it's been an effective strategy, at least that part, of staying away from taking the bait on the nicknames and all of that ridicule and nonsense. And so we'll have to see as we get closer to the end of this thing. He is out more. He was in Pennsylvania over the weekend. He's been moving around to different churches and so forth. But I do think the strategy right now is that the president, for some reason, seems to be stepping on his message. I will say this. If they continue to tear down statues in the United States and they continue to riot, that will play into the president's hands. That will be, as he's searching for a campaign narrative right now, that narrative will be, well, people are trying to take away your cultural heritage, and he'll pit that against each other in a big cultural war. And so, again, your point, I would never rule President Trump out. This is going to be a fight to the finish, Piers, and one of the prize fighters is going to have to get knocked out of the ring for the other one to be successful.
Betsy McCoy, we watch on in interest, of course, because it's such an important role, and he is such a fascinating character. That doesn't necessarily make him a very effective president. He said that 1 million people had applied to go and see him in the stadium, and of course he couldn't even fill it, and his people had to take down the overflow stage outside, and we understand he was absolutely furious about that. If he can't fill a stadium, can he get re-elected?
Yes, in fact, it's very interesting that Anthony, and it's nice to see Anthony, I haven't seen him in a while, he's an old friend. It's very good that Anthony brought up this issue of the toppling of the statues, because this is an issue that is of great concern to Americans and to your viewers in Britain. You've been experiencing this as well this week, even the defacing of a statue of Winston Churchill. And in our country, these cultural vigilantes, these mobs who have torn down statues of Thomas Jefferson and Francis Scott Key, the composer of the Star-Spangled Banner, real icons of American history. This is extremely disturbing to Americans, this kind of attack on our culture, on our heritage. Those vigilantes are robbing something from us.
But Betsy,
and the president addressed that in his speech
I understand that there are some which are disputed and controversial. But Betsy, sorry, if I can ask, Betsy, if I can ask a question. Betsy, if I can ask a question.
These mobs to take control of the United States.
But if there are...
originally, the president was planning to run mostly on the economy. And in fact, the economy appears to be turning around faster than anyone expected. 8 million new jobs in the last month. that was a very big report, a very good indication of what's ahead. But this second issue, this second theme is emerging, which is Americans share this concern with racial justice. We all do, but we don't want to see our cities burned and our statues, our cultural icons.
I think obviously nobody wants to see violence, nobody wants to see the looting. But if there are statues to, for instance, Confederate heroes and statues which memorialise racism and racial injustice, if, as you say, people are united against that, isn't this a time to talk about, why some of these people are still standing?
It's definitely a time to remove those statues. And in the last 3 years, the United States has removed over 115 Confederate statues, major ones from around the country. That's in the process of being done. But these attacks on other American figures, as I said, Christopher Columbus, Thomas Jefferson, Francis Scott Key, and I can go on and on. Attacking those statues says, I hate America. It's not about slavery. It's about an attack on our whole cultural heritage. And if some of those statues should be removed and put in a museum or given less prominence in our society, that is a job for the public to decide as a whole, not
Betsy,
for a small mob.
Okay, Betsy, let me jump in, Betsy.
Away from us.
Let me jump in, Betsy. I don't disagree with what you just said. I think, as Anthony said, it actually helps Trump. If you start pulling down, rather like here, I think it damaged the Black Lives Matter protesters that some people decided to deface Churchill. So I think there are lots of points of agreement here. On Donald Trump's chances of re-election, if you'd asked me in January, is Trump going to win in November? I told everybody he's going to walk it. He's going to absolutely walk it. He'd taken out a series of terrorists. He had got the economy into fantastic shape. Everything was going the right way for an incumbent president to be re-elected. And then he got hit by two huge events. The pandemic, which has been devastating. America has the worst death toll in the world. It has the worst infection rate in the world. It has, on every indicator, the worst in the world. It also caused the biggest recession America's had in my lifetime. So all the indicators which I had in January have gone out the window. The question is, can Donald Trump turn things around enough by November to get re-elected? And I think it's, I would say 50-50 at best.
Well, as Anthony pointed out, 6 months in politics is an eternity. But I do think that Trump has a very good shot, not only because the economy is starting to turn around again, and even Democrats agree in many polls that he is more likely to be able to handle the economy than Joe Biden, but also because an election isn't a referendum on one person. It's a choice between two. And Joe Biden presents an image of weakness, of premature aging. I won't say it's his age, but when he speaks, he seems incompetent often. He's unable to finish a sentence. He raises in the minds of even people who are inclined to like him a question, can he do the job?
Anthony Scaramucci, I mean, that's a terribly critical interpretation of a candidate who actually, I'm sure, is beloved by many Americans. I want to ask about President Trump's leadership in the pandemic. More than 120,000 dead. He dismissed the virus early on, didn't take it seriously. It is now spiking in states which have opened up. I wonder whether that is going to still be something that people worry about when it comes to the election, because this virus isn't going away. There's no cure for it. There's no vaccine for it. President Trump hasn't provided international leadership on this. I mean, some have even criticised his national leadership on it. But how big is that an issue, the health of Americans, for those who will vote?
Point out,
well, hang on,
all,
sorry, Betsy, that was my question to Anthony, sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Sorry.
Well, I think it's a blind spot for the president because, you know, and in Betsy's case, when I was on the transition team, I was actually bringing Betsy in to talk about health care. One of the big blind spots that the president has, he doesn't like going to experts. And so one of the problems the campaign is having, I still have friends in the campaign, even though I have now decided that President Trump, for me, is just not the right person to be president. I just don't think he's fit to serve. And I would encourage everybody listening to read the John Bolton book. Even if you don't like John Bolton, particularly focus on Chapter 8. That's sort of the orange jumpsuit chapter in terms of what's going on inside the administration. But, you know, I mean, this is what I would say to you guys. He doesn't listen to people. So when they gave him the information, and healthcare experts, Betsy's one of them, would have said, okay, maybe we need to do things similar to what's going on in South Korea, he wouldn't listen. And so he goes with his instincts. He tries to curve reality towards his reality. Piers and I know him a long time. He's good at doing that, but you can't do that in a scientific situation. You can't look into the camera and tell the American people fake science and 2 + 2 = 7. They can see on their own hands that 2 + 2 = 4. And so that stuff is going to damage him as he gets towards Election Day. People will litigate the decisions that he's made. You will likely have 200,000 plus deaths in the United States by November.